Today's murders ask us to go back in time to the turn of the century. America was changing, wrestling with the echoes of the Civil War and slavery while looking into a new century that breathed of promise. In the heart of southern Louisiana, a land of bogs and bayous, a string of grisly murders were terrorizing the townsfolk. After the sun set and the lightning bugs came out, families clutched each other in fear that they would be next. You see, today's murderer only killed at night and would lay whole families to waste. And this is the story of 𝚘𝚘𝚘𝚘, the voodoo priestess killer. Welcome to Minute Murders, where we bring you bite-sized stories of true killers you can take on the go. Come and get your daily dose of true crime. Well-documented stories are harder to come by in the early 1900s, and Clementine is no exception. It's filled with fake leads, conflicting confessions, and multiple unfound suspects. What is certain, though, is the flames of terror these murders stoked in southern Louisiana and parts of Texas. Most murders happen in the light of day. The infamous axe killings of 1911 and 1912 all occurred at night when fathers, mothers, and children slept, oblivious to the horror lurking outside their homes. It is believed that Clementine was born in 1894 in St. Martinsville, Louisiana, to Nina Porter and Raymond Barnabit. She had 3 brothers, though only the name of Zephyrin is included in the records. It was January of 1911 in the quiet town of West Crowley, Louisiana. An African-American family was discovered brutally murdered while still laying in bed. Each of their skulls had been split open by an axe, left bloody and upright against one of their beds. There was a bucket of blood in the corner of the room. Presumably, the blood of the victims had been drained into it. Covering the floors of the house were the bloody footprints of the killer. When the police discovered the scene, the doors were all locked, meaning the killer had snuck in through a window undetected. While the gruesome nature of the murder left locals chilled and in a fluke. Nothing like this had happened before, and surely wouldn't happen again. But this was only the beginning of the bloodlust. In the same month, in the same town, another black family would fall victim to the vicious brutality of this nocturnal killer. The Byers family was, as a local paper put it, brained with an axe. Walter Byers, his wife, and their son were hacked to death in a similar fashion while they slept in their beds. And in the months that followed, more families were killed, all in the same hellish manner. The castaways of San Antonio, Texas, a family of 5, were found blooded and chopped by local authorities in the same year as the Byers. Another family, the Andrews, in the neighboring town of Lafayette, Louisiana, were also killed in the dead of the night. If one murdered family was a fluke, and 2 was a tragedy, 3 was a pattern. Finally, police began to suspect that these killings were all connected and they were dealing with a deranged serial killer. The first and principal suspect was a local man by the name of Raymond Barnabit. Raymond was a sharecropper, though the profession didn't pay well, and so he resorted to petty theft to provide for his family. Raymond had the reputation of being a criminal among the locals, and it didn't help that he was a man from the poor part of town. Though the Civil War had freed the slaves for over 4 decades prior, old ways died hard. It wasn't difficult for the police to imagine a local black man of low social standing being capable of murder. The authorities arrested Raymond Barnabit after his mistress expressed suspicion following a fight they had. Raymond was put on trial in October of 1911, and his own children, Seraphine and Clementine, were called to testify against him. Both children described a father who was abusive and terrorizing his family. They said Raymond would yell and beat them often, and that if he remained free, they would fear for their lives. Clementine described one night in particular that was a damning testimony against her father. She said he got home bragging about killing the whole Andrews family. After this, it didn't take the jury much deliberation to convict and sentence Raymond. See, they wanted to see the man hobble away in chains. Finally, the locals could breathe a sigh of relief, perhaps even sleep soundly at night knowing this grisly killer was behind bars. And while the townsfolk returned to their routines, the police to the mundane cases, and Raymond served his time, another murder shook the countryside. On November 26, 1911, Norbert Randall and his wife and their 3 children were found dead with axe blows to their head. The same horrifying pattern of the previous axe murders, except this one had a twist. Norbert had been shot in the head. Was this a new copycat killer? Was it an accomplice of Raymond? Why shoot Norman and diverge from the pattern of the other murders? Sheriff Louis Lacoste had suspects immediately. During Raymond's trial, he had a suspicion about Seraph and Clementine. Aside from general prejudice, they had found a batch of blooded clothes that belonged to Clementine. A local paper called the 𝚘𝚘𝚎𝚗 said that a complete suit of women's clothes was found in her room, saturated with blood and covered with human brains. At the time, she said that her father Raymond had wiped blood on them after killing the Andrews family. The explanation was enough for the court, but the sheriff had never forgotten, and now he had a reason to strike. It didn't help that the Barnabas neighbors, the Stevens family, described them as filthy, shifty, and degenerate. Lacoste arrested the siblings. When questioned, Seraphine provided an alibi, but Clementine had none, and she was imprisoned. But even with Raymond and Clementine in jail, the murders not only continued, but they escalated. In January of 1912, 3 more families were killed. One of these families, the Broussards, was found with their hands splattered with wood pieces. The killer had placed buckets underneath their beds to collect the pooling blood that seeped from the mattress. For the first time in this string of murders, a message was left behind. When he maketh the inquisition for blood, he forgiveth not the cry of the humble. The inscription, a reading of Psalms 9:12, was written in blood on walls and signed, the Human Five. The local papers ran wild with the story, drumming up theories and speculating about the identities of these mysterious human gang of 5, as they were now calling them. Here, for the first time, the idea of voodoo was brought into discussion. Voodoo already had a tainted reputation in Louisiana, held mostly by the Catholics and the Christians, who taught the practice was low class and of the devil. The black magic of voodoo was now at play, and there was never a better fuel to throw onto the fires of frenzy than the idea that these murders were a form of the dark cult. Voodoo traces its origins back to Western Africa, and before the slaves were brought from the Atlantic. In its original form, it's a form of spiritualism that refers to many gods and spirits. New Orleans voodoo is a fusion of these ancient customs and the Christian traditions of the New World. Many Catholics and more fundamental Christians look down on the practice as a provision of the Christian faith. In voodoo, the world is populated by spirits known as the Loa. These spirits can be both good and evil, capable of imparting good luck and cursing those invoked with their names. In later confessions, Clementine would mention a special charm she bought from a local practitioner of voodoo. It was an item known as a conjuring bag and was designed to protect the owner and give them good fortune. The conjuring bag is merely one example of the references to folk magic in New Orleans voodoo that the Christians hated. The Louisiana countryside was full of fear and rumors. Which town would be struck next? Which family would lie to sleep and then never wake again? They became known as the Voodoo Murders, and they captured the attention of the whole of southern Louisiana. With this brand of sensationalism and the fear of black magic spreading far and wide, the police were forced to act. They questioned Clementine about her involvement in the murders, who the Human Five were, and details about this insidious murder cult. The papers had latched onto a group called the Church of Sacrifice, and they believed they were behind the killings. Clementine confessed to murdering 17 people on April 5th of 1912. She said she did it. In fact, belonged to a group known as the Church of Sacrifice, and they performed these killings out of respect for God. The members of the church would draw lots, or pick at random who was to perform the murder. The member would then sneak into the victim's home in the middle of the night, armed with an axe and a conjuring bag to protect them. See, the Church of Sacrifice believed that these murders would grant them salvation in the life to come. Clementine specifically said she dressed as a man at night to better disguise herself, and after the murders would sometimes caress the bodies. When asked why she killed the children as well, Clementine only said she didn't want them to be left as orphans in the world. Building a clear case against Clementine was not the easiest task, given the fact that her story had holes and conflicting motives. Why had she confessed so easily against her father in court when she had committed the murders? It's likely that Clementine was involved in the Church of Sacrifice, but was covering for a number of murders she had not actually done. Each name Clementine gave to the police as a potential member of the Human Gang of Five was a dead end. Authorities was left with a few answers and a few leads, but there was so much pressure from the public, they had to make a decision, and fast. Clementine was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 19. She was to spend the rest of her life in the Louisiana penitentiary. Perhaps she truly was the sole mastermind, or maybe she was mentally ill. Perhaps she was a scapegoat for the rest of the cult. Soon after her incarceration, Clementine attempted to escape, but was captured and brought back within a few hours. However, she would only end up spending 10 years of her sentence in prison. Clementine received an undisclosed brain operation that, according to the reports, restored her to a normal state. She was deemed no longer a threat and allowed to live as a free woman. Some speculate that Clementine received a lobotomy, an experimental surgery that disconnects pieces of the brain's prefrontal cortex. But this couldn't be the case. The lobotomy was not performed in the United States until about a decade later in the 1930s. The truth is, we will never know the operation Clementine received that allowed her to leave prison. But whatever it was convinced the judge that she was not a danger to society. It's difficult to say how much of Clementine's story is completely accurate. The records are scarce, and the motive is still unclear. Did she truly believe she would receive immortality by killing others? Or was she just hopelessly insane? And who are the mysterious human gang of 5? If the group actually existed and she had accomplices, they were never found by the police. Clementine herself disappeared after being released from prison. No one knows where she went or what she did with her life, but her influence in southern Louisiana lingers till this day. The notorious axe murders of 1911 and 1912 were a bloody crusade that filled the land with fear and terror. Perhaps they really were carried out by a young woman claiming to be a voodoo priestess. Or maybe there is more to the story and the Church of Sacrifice had deeper roots, greater influence than we can imagine. Whatever, the whole truth is, one thing is certain: the Louisiana South has never seen such a bloody trail since, and likely never will. Clementine Barnabet remains linked to some of the most horrific murders ever committed. Written by 𝚘𝚘𝚘𝚍𝚘𝚘, narrated by Chris Oxendine.